All right, we're going to see if I'm getting this crazy echo and feedback, and right now I'm not, so that's good. So this is like take number 4. Yeah, so that's great. Again, everyone that's tuned in, this is like my first time doing the live stream thing. I appreciate all the patience. I have a great gentleman by the name of Levi that's here that is helping me out. So shout out to Levi for trying to help kind of put this thing together. So I'm going to start from the top. My name's A.K. Kamara. I call myself the conservative opinionator, kind of as a tongue-in-cheek type of deal, because I was creating videos and people were like, oh, you're telling us, things that aren't true, or prove what you're saying to be true. And I'm like, well, this is just my opinion. And I'm giving my opinion from a conservative perspective because ideologically I'm a conservative dude. And so someone's like, what do you think? You're like this conservative person that gives their opinion? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm the conservative opinionator. But I am creating this, I don't know, we'll call it a weekly live stream at this point. If it becomes more popular, then I'll probably do more live streams. But I'm going to break down politics, news, and culture, not unlike many of the other YouTubers that are out there right now. The difference is I bring kind of a political activist perspective. Like, I'm actually involved in politics. I've held various positions. Right now, I was elected to a 4-year term as Minnesota's Republican National Committeeman. I'm technically elected because my term doesn't start until after the Republican National Convention. So July 19th is when it starts. But that perspective is kind of different than what I've seen with a lot of YouTubers. Like, a lot of YouTubers have a lot of, obviously, right of center political views and values that are, we'll call it, like, again, right of center YouTubers, but they're usually not activists. I'm an activist in every sense of the word. I'm involved in my local Republican Party unit, and I'm involved at the state party unit, and I'm also involved now nationally. So I'm going to kind of bring that all together, still offer my opinion, my conservative ideological opinion when it comes to news, culture, music, and hopefully you'll like my perspective. If not, then I guess this will be a short-lived experiment and experience. So for those of you that don't know, I live in the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities area. I'm on John Justice on Twin Cities News Talk every Friday. I also have a TikTok presence. I got about 120-some thousand followers there. And I just make videos commenting on what is happening in the news. So I'm going to take that exact kind of format, but do a longer form. And obviously being live stream, you're going to be asking questions, you're going to have comments. And so hopefully we can have some interaction back and forth there. But this is the perspective that I bring. I'm not just a guy that has ideas and thoughts about what's happening in the world. I'm actually taking those ideas and thoughts and employing them through our political apparatus, hopefully to spur some of you watching to do the exact same thing. Like, that would be like my end goal, is to get more people politically activated to do something politically where you live. Not just complain about it, not just watch videos, not just share. That's all good. Like, go and do that. But why don't you take it to the next step and actually start doing something, making change in your community that actually reflects your values. And so that's what I hope to accomplish. So kind of the first story I want to talk about, clearly, obviously, it's one of the largest stories that are happening in the United States, I would argue, especially politically. It's definitely number one. And that was this absolute amazing performance by President Donald Trump in the presidential debate, and the absolute train wreck car crash set it on fire. Oh my God, I can't believe that happened on live television performance from President Joseph Robinette Biden. So that's going to be like number one. And I think here's the thing that we have to understand. There's been a lot of narratives that have come out of this debate. And the first narrative that's kind of like prominent top, I'd say the largest talking point is, oh my God, Biden is toast. Like, this dude's brain doesn't work. So we need to hurry up and replace him. Like, that's what the Democrat talking heads are saying. That's what the corporate mainstream media is saying. And I think a prime example of that, I have a story here pulled up, and it's just kind of breaks it all down by The Guardian. And it's American media heavyweights tell president it's time to quit. Now, the New York Times had an editorial piece breaking down kind of their plea that for the good of the country, President Biden must step aside. And it's like, okay, where have you been for the last, almost 4 years? This is not a new phenomenon. And this is what's so interesting about this perspective, is that it's like all of a sudden, all of these people in the corporate mainstream media, people that really don't pay attention to everyday politics, that maybe have a center or center-left perspective, pretend as though they did not know that Biden's brain has been failing ever since he was actually inaugurated. Like, Republicans have been making fun of this issue, and I know maybe that's not the nicest way to pose it, but this man said he wanted to be president of the United States, so fair criticism, right? Like, if you want to actually represent a population of people, then all criticisms are on the table because you're trying to represent us. So it's just funny that, again, all of these people, and especially the corporate mainstream media, is coming out with this narrative that, oh, well, this clearly shows that Biden just has lost a step or whatever it might be. My perspective is kind of twofold. Number one, if you're a supporter of President Donald Trump, reject this entire notion that somehow Biden is going to step down and they are going to install a new candidate or nominee. Completely remove that from your brain. It's insane. Functionally, it doesn't work because there actually is a process in which you as a candidate go before your party in the form of primaries and caucuses and try to convince people to vote for you. And when that process started, when that season began, the Democrats said, Joe Biden is our man. And that is who the voters over and over and over again, and caucus attendees and delegates said, yes, he is our man. The Democrats, that's what they did. So that's number one. It's just like functionally, no, it's insane that you would drop in now after that entire contest is basically over. And number two, it would actually spell the demise of Democrats, not just for the presidential race, but for races down the ballot. Because you got to remember, we're talking about entire political structure for a nation that then also goes down to the state level, to the legislative level, all the way down to municipalities. So it all the way down that board, all the way down that ballot, Democrats would lose. And why would they lose? Because average everyday voters would see that this is nothing more than just wanting to hold on to power. Like, we have a lot of conversations, especially in these political circles, where, you know, we view things through a lens of politics, right? And sometimes I tell people to take a step back and, you know, there's a phrase, touch grass. And the idea is, like, don't always see everything as political. Sometimes try and see it from an average, everyday, you know, voter's experience. And this is a prime example of average, everyday voters would not understand all of this other nuance. And they say, well, why are you waiting until now? Oh, it's because he was absolutely terrible at a debate. So that's like kind of all encompassed in one. But number two, don't take the bait that this is actually a real concern, because it, one way or the other, let's say that you think that Biden did such a bad job that it's like a slam dunk for Trump, that it's going to be this gigantic tsunami red wave, or you are truly worried that, let's say, Gavin Newsom would actually be more competitive against Trump than Biden. Again, that second aspect, get that out of your mind, because it's meant to make you either feel confident so you don't go out and do the work, the actual work of door knocking, identifying voters, going out there and chasing ballots, which is something that is going to be new to Republicans across this country. Also being able to identify which voters we should target with messaging, because dollars are finite. And so when you're going to send out a mailer, you're going to have an advertising campaign, we should probably get the message to people that are open to our ideas instead of sending them to people that will vote for Biden no matter what, or whomever the Democrat candidate or nominee is. So we want to make sure that we do not get distracted. We don't want to be too confident thinking that it's a slam dunk. And we also don't want to be nervous and say, well, let's just wait and see what happens. Because every single day that ticks off of the calendar that is closer to the general election is a day that we are losing if we do not do this correctly. And so remove both of these concepts from your brain. It's not politically feasible for Biden to be swapped out, and it should not give you any level of confidence. We should approach as though that debate was what it actually was, which is just a single point in time that just better paints where things are right now in this race. President Donald Trump has the best chance of winning. That's just what it comes down to. But it's not a guarantee. It's all about percentages. He looks really good now. I think that he has been on fire. I think the way that he approached this debate was very, very good. The strategy behind it, which was Don't be overt, like don't be rude. Don't just be a dick, basically. As long as you don't do that, you're not going to scare away a lot of these suburban voters and even the older voters. So he let Biden basically attack himself by fumbling and bumbling over his words. And so that's basically Trump's strategy. And then to talk not about the grievances that he feels have been levied against him, because there are a lot of good, legitimate reasons that President Trump has to go out there and complain. But truthfully, the American people don't really care about Trump's personal feelings about what's gone well and what's gone bad. I mean, those of us that actually support President Trump, we do care, yes. But the average American voter that's not like a diehard Trump supporter doesn't care if Trump is upset. They care about their own lives. They care about what's going to affect their families. And so Trump did an amazing job at keeping that conversation about what he can do for the nation, what we as the people want to see. So that was a fantastic strategy. But I want to go back to the story that American media heavyweights are telling the president it's time to quit. At the end of the day, again, you're going to continue to see this narrative get pushed out there that somehow now is the time for President Biden to step aside. I'm going to say the opposite. If you support President Trump, don't endorse this idea at all. Actually saying, you know what? I believe in President Biden. He should stay in. He is the best chance that the Democrats have. Now, actually, that's kind of true. Like, as terrible and as demented as his brain is, you're so late in the process that he actually is the best chance for Democrats to even have a chance at winning. And that's hilarious because they did this to themselves. But I just think it's funny that, looking at this at 6:15 p.m. on Friday, roughly 19 hours after two presidential candidates left the stage in Atlanta the previous evening, the verdict of the New York Times editorial board dropped online to the newspaper subscribers. Which is another funny thing is there was a story that was done by Cassandra McDonald over at SCNR News showing that if you look at the actual hyperlink, it shows that it was written before the debate concluded. So this entire op-ed by the New York Times about calling on Biden to step down. So they had already been writing it, right? Like it's not uncommon, I guess, in news media that you would start writing a story. So maybe they had a draft saved on whatever software they use to upload their stories or whatever. But they definitely were writing it beforehand because they knew, and this is the best part about this entire conversation, is that they knew that Biden's brain could fail spectacularly on national television. And that's 100% what happened. So just kind of seeing that come to fruition. I just think it's funny because, it talks about this judgment that was invoked the same as 1968 when Walter Cronkite, a CBS anchor, and his television platform openly questioned the U.S. military commitment to Vietnam. Like they're trying to harken back to the 60s. Come on, it's in Vietnam. That you got to do something for the betterment of the country. It's absurd. At the end of the day, Biden had all this time to really decide what he wanted to do leading up to this election cycle, and people that were close to him that actually care about him should have been able to tell him, hey Joe, even if you feel great, your brain clearly doesn't work as good as it should be working. And I think it's that simple. If people actually cared about President Biden and they didn't want to just use him for power, they would have approached him from that perspective. And if Joe actually had some humility to him, which he has zero, this is a man that's been in office for 50 years, public office. He thinks that he is the greatest thing to ever exist, like in his own mind, in his own world. So the idea that he would take a step back and say, well, this would be for the betterment of the nation, that's absurd. So this entire article just kind of goes through and lays out this long diatribe of all the things that, the corporate mainstream media is calling for President Biden to do for the betterment of the country. But again, my overall thesis on this, it's too late. He had his chance to step down. Now the Democrats have made their bed, and we, as people that support President Donald Trump, should force them to lay in that bed. They cannot decide to all of a sudden switch out. Even if they did, as I'm telling you, it would actually be worse for Democrats nationwide. It's just that if we're trying to just keep things above board, the best thing to do is to have the Democrats present their best option with the field that they already have. So we should say, hey, you gotta keep your guy in there. Kind of going on to, kind of understanding also the complexity of this issue. There's a little bit of nuance, right? There's this idea coming from the corporate mainstream media that like everyone's saying he's got to step down. Well, according to the story, his campaign, they're able to fundraise $27 million after that first debate. So with Biden melting down on national television, this just kind of lets you know that not everyone truly thinks that Biden is going to step down. And that's why I say it's more of a distraction to get people to kind of get off of their game and stop focusing on doing the work that it takes to actually win a presidential election and to win your election in the state that you live in or your legislative district. But he's still raising money. People saw that performance and said, I'm still going to give millions of dollars to this man. So that just shows that it's not like everyone and their mom is like truly behind the idea of Biden dropping out. And I think that's crazy that you would give money to a man whose brain is like melting on national television. But it does just show that there are plenty of people that don't really care whether or not he has dementia. They care about keeping power. Now, the way that I describe it is that there's actually like three groups, in the Democrat apparatus, we'll call it. Or I'll say not even apparatus, but on the Democrat side of things. First, you have like the corporate mainstream media, the talking heads, right? The Joanne Reeds, just the Stephen Colberts, right? You have all of these talking heads that are like, oh, here's what we need to do. And some of them are split, right? Some of them, like Van Jones, is crying on TV, right? Saying like, I know Joe Biden's heart, he's such a good man, but for the better of the country, you got to step down. And then there's other commentators that are like, no, this is just one bad debate performance. But that group right there, mostly they want Biden to step down. But the reason they want that is because they know that if Republicans sweep in, they lose a lot of their viewership and a lot of their power. And so like that's group one. Group two is the most obvious one, which is Biden's group. This is the current administrative state, the deep state, Biden supporters. All of them clearly want Biden to stay in. Biden went out the day after, had this rally where he's like kind of self-deprecating, talks about, I may not be as quick as I used to be, and I may not be able to speak as eloquently as I used to. And people were like, why couldn't he give this type of speech at the debate? No, it's because, listen, when you're in cognitive decline, not every moment of every day is going to be like that, especially in the beginning of your cognitive decline. You're going to have some really, really good days, and then you're going to have some really, really bad days. But clearly this second group, the administrative state, the deep state, the Biden administration, they don't want Biden to step down. Otherwise, he would have already announced that he's going to step down. And then the third realm is really the people that are involved in the political apparatus that are attached to the right. And, that group, attached to the left. And that group is like looking down the ballot, and all they care about is whether or not they're going to be able to keep their positions of power. And so that group kind of waffles back and forth. Some people from that group are going to distance themselves from Joe Biden because of how terrible he looked on national television. But a lot of the other members are just going to say, well, let's go with whatever the political winds are telling us. So if people are starting to feel sympathetic for Biden, then they're going to support Biden. If people are saying, no, we don't want Biden, then they're going to distance themselves. But these are really the three groups that make up, again, like we'll call it left of center politics in the United States. And each of these three groups have a relatively strong opinion on if Biden should continue. And that's just kind of the way that I see it. That's my analysis. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? Maybe I'm a dum-dum and the way that I see things is not how most people see them. But that's how I perceive it. So these three groups are all kind of vying for what should Joe Biden do. Clearly, Biden's group has the most power. And that's why I think that Biden isn't going anywhere. So again, you got to stay kind of on your game. And what I mean by that is like, we have one goal. If you don't support what the Biden regime is doing, if you don't support what the Democrats are doing, that's to get them out of power. That's our goal, number one. The best way to do that, obviously, is to get President Trump elected to another term. And then also, again, for your local races, to be able to help Republicans take back power. Now, in Minnesota, we have this trifecta, right? Democrats control the governor's mansion, the state house, and the state senate. And so in Minnesota, we are doing everything in our power to make this change of power, right? Like we want Republicans to win. Like we have a really good chance of flipping the Minnesota State House. Typically, we shouldn't have a good chance of flipping the state Senate, but because of a vacancy with one of our state senators running to be in Congress, along with another state senator known as like the DFL burglar, we have Senator Mitchell. She has this crazy story where she broke into her stepmother-in-law's home or her stepmother's home, and all this crazy stuff happened. But the Republican Party, we've been kind of watching how things are going there. But within the Democrat Party, the leadership has called for her to step down, to resign. And because this session is over, it's kind of like they don't want the political blowback. But she is very, very defiant. Senator Mitchell has said straight up, like, I am not going to resign. So that remains to be seen. It's possible that she could step down, but at this point, based off of filing deadlines and things like that, her election wouldn't be during the general election. It would be after that. But ultimately, we still have a chance to flip the state Senate with that race that's out in the 3rd Congressional District. And I can't remember the state senator's name for the life of me. So we have that opportunity. So my point is that there's a lot of work that can be done here in Minnesota. And so if you live in Minnesota, I would encourage you to visit with like basically your local elected officials. You can go to mngop.com, and then there's a tab that clicks down that you can look at congressional districts, and then you can look at your BPOU, your basic political organizing unit, and you can get connected with your BPOU so you can understand like what they're doing. Every BPOU right now is pushing to get volunteers to go out and knock on doors. That's one of the best ways to actually identify voters and reconnect with voters that are Republicans. On top of that, we are doing chase the ballot efforts. We want to ask people, hey, do you have a plan when it comes to voting on Election Day? Now, President Trump announced that they are going to have an initiative called Swamp the Vote. It's like swampthevoteusa.com or .org. And if you go to that website, you can find ways to make a plan to vote. So this is really going to come into absentee voting. If you aren't going to be able to vote on Election Day in person, the next best thing that you can do is request an absentee ballot, and then you could actually turn in that absentee ballot, like yourself, in person, to an election clerk, to an election official. And that way you don't have to worry about someone, changing your vote or doing something like that, or throwing your ballot in, someone's trunk of a car, or throwing it in the garbage. But again, just it's about having a plan, so you can go ahead and do that. Also, there's Trump Force 47, which is, again, another way that you can get involved with some of the election activities. But when you're thinking about what you can do, especially for those of you that live in Minnesota, you want to have a plan. Now, there's certain deadlines about when does early voting start for the general election. Right now, we are in the period of primary election voting in Minnesota. So if you support the Republican Party and you support our endorsed candidates, again, make a plan to vote on primary day. We have our endorsed candidates that are being challenged by non-endorsed candidates for the Republican Party. And so, again, one of the top ones is Royce White. He's being challenged by Joe Frazier. Royce White is the endorsed Republican candidate. And then we have a bunch of our legislative races. And again, you have non-endorsed candidates that are challenging the endorsed candidate. So if you believe in the Republican Party, like the actual party itself, not just the name of it, but the structure and function of it, you have to go and vote to defend our endorsed candidates. And so again, this all comes back to this idea: do not let the Democrats make you take your eye off of the ball, take your eye off of the prize when it comes to wondering what's going to happen with Joe Biden, if he's going to run, if someone's going to replace him, if Donald Trump is going to slam dunk. Take all of that out of your mind and focus on being able to turn out the vote and do what you can to flip these states, because Minnesota really isn't playing. Depending on the state that you live in, the same is likely true. Now, if you live in a state where everything is shored up, like Trump's going to win, Republicans control everything, I would say look at helping other states that are close to you. They do a lot of like virtual phone banking where you could actually get connected with like a dialer system, and you can make phone calls in other states to help them. You can also open up your checkbook and again, find different races in different states of people that are going to support President Donald Trump's America First agenda in a lot of those federal races. And again, finding other candidates down the ballot in other states if your state is all shored up, so you can, again, do everything in your power to help turn this entire country around. And the only way that's going to happen is if we actually get President Donald Trump in. Now, the Supreme Court is nearing the end of its session. This is going to be a hard pivot, but I think it's an important conversation that we need to be able to understand and have. The Supreme Court's been coming out with a lot of opinions and rulings. I believe the last day of this court's session is on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's going to be on Monday, and that comes out to, that's going to be Monday the 3rd of July. No, not the 3rd. What day is it? Monday the 1st of July. Yeah. So the 1st of July is going to be the last day of this session. And this court has came out with a lot of really good rulings. Some not so great, like the censorship ruling was absolute trash. I posted about that on my social. Make sure that if you're watching this video, you like it. Make sure you hit that like button. I don't think I've said that one time during the stream. Make sure to share this video too if you like it. I think I'm gonna, after the live stream, go and like cut out all the beginning part, so you don't have to sit there for like whatever 55 minutes and wait until the live stream starts. But I think it's important to have a conversation. Out of all the rulings, I think one of the bigger ones, there's really two, but the biggest one in my opinion, because I'm a person that believes in our Constitution, I think that the Constitution should be the guiding principle to the way that our government actually works. Like if there's a question about, hey, is this, should we do this move or should we create this policy? I say, go look at the Constitution. What does that say? And let that be your guiding principle. So when it comes to federal policy, it should be very straightforward. The Constitution says, here are the specific things that a federal government should be involved in. And then here's all of these other things that the states can make decisions on. And then even within, again, the Constitution, when it comes to federal powers, what should the different branches be doing? If you're part of the executive branch, your job is to enforce the rule of law, right? Like that's the job of the president, Department of Justice, all the departments that fall underneath the executive branch. Their job is not to write law, it's to enforce the law. The legislative branch, their job is to make the laws, right? They're the ones that say, here's what we should have for laws and rules. And then the judicial branch is there to adjudicate the law whenever there's differences of opinion about how something should be done. But that is the purpose of the judicial branch, is to go out there and, actually be a judge and adjudicate concerns and issues when someone is charged with something or there's a question about if this is legal or illegal or someone has a grievance against someone else when it comes to civil law. And the Supreme Court ruled basically that, you know what? We do have a separation of branches and powers for a reason. So we cannot defer those duties and responsibilities to other branches. Now, specifically, this court ruling, I'm trying to see what the actual court case is, because I know it's called the Chevron deference case. I actually want to look and see what the actual name of the lawsuit was. But that's important, right? Like, I mean, Chevron deference, that's important to understand, but the actual ruling of the court, let's see here. Where's the name of the court case? Well, looking for it. And eventually I'll actually be able to look at the chat. So if someone's in chat saying like, oh, this is what it's called, whatever. I can't find the name of the actual, I think it's like Lopez or something like that. But anyways, it's not really as significant. I mean, it's important. You should know what the name of the court case is. But the main contention was whether or not when the executive branch, again, they're in control of executing the law. When they execute the law, should they be able to actually make policies that hold the same power as law? And that question had been answered that, well, actually, yes, the executive branch can actually use their own opinion and their own, if you want to say, procedure to create what is, in effect, law and legal precedent when it comes to making decisions about how something should be done one way or another. And this has been a pretty big contentious issue that for a long time, people that are constitutionalists have said, this is unconstitutional. For instance, let's say that, again, Congress passes a bill and they say, we're going to create the Environmental Protection Agency. So then within the executive branch, the EPA says, okay, we have this agency and we're going to go out and execute what we believe Congress wants us to do in regards to like the policies that should be implemented. And they took that and stretched it to its furthest extreme, to the point that the Environmental Protection Agency can just straight up say, this is illegal, this is legal. And again, that question about whether or not the executive branch should be able to basically create new laws based off of their executive power that Congress said, well, hey, you have this agency, is that unconstitutional? And basically the Supreme Court said, no, that's not constitutional. If Congress wants to be more specific about what they want these executive agencies to do, then Congress needs to pass a new piece of legislation to define what that's going to be. Now, kind of looking at this, again, you're going to have one perspective that, you know, the constitutionalists on the court, all they did is shackle Biden and every future president, and they created a mess for Congress to solve. That's an interesting way to really say, well, we're going to make Congress do their job, and their job is they have to find compromise when they write new pieces of legislation. The simple idea that something is difficult to pass, so therefore, because it's difficult and you can't find bipartisanship to address an issue, you're going to punt it to the executive branch and let them use godlike, authoritarian, despot, dictator-like rules to actually pass something akin to legislation because they don't have to find any compromise. Because in the executive branch, right, you say, okay, the Environmental Protection Agency, they're now going to say that, for instance, CO2 is now considered a pollutant. Now, that's not because there was legislation passed saying that CO2 is a pollutant. That was a decision made purely by the executive branch and by that agency that now will impose fines, fees that could lead up to going to jail because they just decided, yep, CO2 is now going to be considered a pollutant. Now, if Congress wants that, basically that agency to have that authority, they need to pass a piece of legislation that says we are going to give them this power within this scope to do this thing. And if they can't do it, then the executive branch, and in this case, again, the Environmental Protection Agency, has no business doing this in any way, shape, or form. Now, a little bit of the backstory. So the Chevron deference case comes back to a once obscure Reagan-era legal doctrine, and it remade one of the most fundamental aspects of power in Washington. And now it hobbles presidents pursuing aggressive policies on anything from abortion to student debt relief. That's the way that they're framing this, right? Is that, poor Washington, now they can't just ram things through whenever they want. Peeling back the doctrine known as the Chevron deference has been a conservative cause for decades, one aimed at restricting agencies' freedom to decide how to interpret Congress, often ambiguous statutes. Where Michigan produces cars, Texas pumps oil, the nation's capital is America's leading manufacturer of regulations, and that's a problem because if you believe in things like free market capitalism, having a bunch of regulations that can be imposed without the will of the people anywhere in consideration is a bad thing, and it actually stymies the free market. Chevron is overruled. Courts must exercise their independent judgment in deciding whether an agency has acted within its statutory authority, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in his majority opinion. And again, I can't stress how important it is to understand that if you believe that our Constitution matters, this ruling is so powerful because it should be this messy. Like, it's not a bad thing that it's messy like this, right? The idea that we have a legislative branch in which those elected officials have to go to their constituents and say, hey, I want to represent the interests of you, my constituents, and now I'm going to have to go and represent that interest by actually cutting deals and finding compromise. Now, if you don't like that, I hate to break it to you, that's the way that our Congress is set up, because you have to be able to find a way to come together with different interests. That's the way it's meant to be. And if you, as the voter, doesn't like the job that our elected officials are doing, then you kick them out and you find someone new. The process is supposed to be messy for a reason. That's like by design, because you shouldn't be able to just kind of do whatever you want when it comes to passing laws. Like there should be some tension. It's like competition does actually produce something better. Like I'm a hardcore right-wing MAGA extremist, but I also understand that if I was in Congress or any other legislative body, I can't just go in and say, here's what I'm going to do, and everyone screw off. It's never going to work that way. It actually doesn't represent the will of your voters, of your constituents. So you're going to have to find a way to make that work. And then when it comes to the executive branch, yeah, in order to allow the executive branch to function, they do have things within their power, but writing new law is not one of them. It never has been, and it never should have been. So peeling back and saying we have to go to a place that judges will be able to say, in this specific example, nope, the executive branch overstepped their authority. You have to go to the legislative branch. You have to lobby for them to pass new legislation that's going to be representative of the will of the people. That is always a good thing. Reining in separation of powers and putting people back in their lanes is how it should be. I think it was Obama that first had the record for like the most executive orders ever, right? Like he saw what Bush did and he like took it to the next level. And then Trump had a lot of executive orders too. And so like understand that even if my guy is in, I still want to do, like I still want my guy to be constrained by what the Constitution says. Even if it's going to be a bunch of executive orders that I think are good, you set that precedence, and then the next guy that gets in that you absolutely despise, like a Joe Biden, will say, okay, well then I get to be king. I get to write legislation whenever I want by signing these executive orders. The executive orders are supposed to have a narrow scope that can, again, be overturned by the next executive. But the way that our executive branch has been out of control, it's like they defer all of these actions to these different cabinet positions and to these different departments and agencies and say, have free reign, have free will. So again, going back to kind of the way that this Chevron deference being overturned is that, guess what? Biden's not going to be able to go and, decide to write off all this student debt. He shouldn't have been able to do it in the first place, because that in and of itself is removing power from the people that first extended the money in the first place, right? When you go and you extend money to a group of people, the idea that the president should be able to just swoop in and say, nope, here's what you're going to do. We're going to forgive all this student debt. That should be Congress. Congress should have to work together. And if your, retort back is, well, Congress is never going to pass student debt relief. Too bad. You better find a way to make it work, or maybe it's just not popular enough amongst the American electorate. So that's what it really comes down to for the Chevron deference. And I know I've said it like a bunch of different ways. And I've been, this entire time, I'm still trying to find what the name is, but I think it's something Lopez. One day I'll find it. So, when I find it, maybe, I'll talk about it in my next video. But that's a really good thing that Congress has done. I want to actually shift over to Minnesota because, like I said, I think it's important to talk about things that are affecting Minnesotans, because I do have a presence here in Minnesota, and a lot of, obviously, like the national podcasters, they're usually not going to talk about individual states unless it's a story that's going viral or something like that. But I'm going to make it a point of each of my streams to talk about what's happening in Minnesota. Taking a look at this story again, federal appeals court rules against Lakeville School District in free speech case. Now, this is actually really, really fascinating, and it actually reaches beyond just Minnesota. But I think it's kind of cool that in Minnesota, we had this case that was brought forward. Long and short of it, in the Lakeville school system, they were able to put a Black Lives Matter, paraphernalia, basically, right? They could have Black Lives Matter flag, they could have slogans everywhere, and they said that this was part of protected speech. However, if you wanted to put up Blue Lives Matter or have a Blue Lives Matter sign, the school district said, no, that's not protected speech. That's discriminatory speech. And so a couple of families got together. It looks like they joined together. Let's see here with it looks like the Midwest Law Center, I believe, Upper Midwest Law Center. And they were able to bring this case before a federal judge. And the federal judge said, guess what? Either it's all speech that's protected by the First Amendment or none of it's speech. And so, like, either way, when you kind of think about it, like, if you're in a school district and your choices are either there's no Black Lives Matter, or if there's Black Lives Matter, there can be Blue Lives Matter, or whatever other slogan that you want to use, that's the fair thing. Now, kind of, I'm of one mind on this. I think it's all free speech. I think it should all be allowed. I think that if you're a teacher and you want to, put up, religious teachings and religious icons and iconography, I think that you should be able to do that, right? If you want to have, during Christmas time, tell the story about Jesus Christ, you should be able to do that. Now, I say that that's what you should be able to do because of freedom of speech. The idea of like separation of church and state only applies to like forcing people to have to accept or adopt another religious belief. But when it comes to actually reflecting your values, I think that's how it should be. And so in the same way that you're going to have teachers that are going to go out there and with all their pro LGBTQ stuff or whatever, things that people on the right and conservatives are going to disagree with, I think that that's the best way to handle it. Because I still think that there are more people in a society that actually have right of center values and beliefs, even within the education system. I know that teachers get such a bad rap. Like, people have this like perspective that like every teacher is like this far leftist or something crazy. And it's just not true. I have a bunch of friends, buddies, that are teachers that are 100% conservative. And again, they're a reflection on the rest of society. If you go into a smaller town, you're going to find people that work in the school system that are going to be right of center. If you go into the hotbed of Minneapolis or St. Paul, just like the rest of the population, you're going to find a bunch of Marxists, collectivists, progressives that are also going to represent. So that's kind of where I stand. But just kind of reading through this decision, this is a huge victory for free speech and a serious blow to government efforts to pass off private activist speech as its own, said James Dickey, senior counsel for the Upper Midwest Law Center. It outlined that the district's policy regarding Black Lives Matter posters constituted impermissible viewpoint discrimination. And this is why this is so important, is that this lower court initially threw out this, they said, like, we're not going to even take a look at it. But having the federal court say, hey, we reviewed this, and at the end of the day, we believe that you have to allow freedom of speech. It shows that the UMLC represented local taxpayer parents, Bob and Cynthia. The lawsuit was filed in 2023, challenged the school district stance on allowing Black Lives Matter posters while rejecting alternative message such as Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Plaintiffs argued that this selective acceptance violated their First Amendment rights. Judge Jerry Blackwell ordered the dismissal of the initial lawsuit in 2023. The case is Cajun versus Independent School District 194 is now remanded back to the District Court of Minnesota. It's expected to compel the Lakeville School District to either broaden its policy on posted messaging or return to a stance of viewpoint neutrality. Now that's the second aspect, right? Like I said, my preference is you let everyone have kind of their opinion in the school, in the classroom. But if we're not going to do that, then I guess we have nothing at all that's political in any way, shape, or form. My problem with going back to this viewpoint neutrality is you got to understand that there's plenty of people that are on the left that don't believe that Black Lives Matter is like a political thing. They don't believe that having a rainbow flag is a political stance or political statement. And so then you get into this very messy area where it's like, well, no, this isn't political. This is just my way of life. And that's why, to me, instead of trying to fight that battle of what is considered viewpoint neutral, because I guess you could say anything that expresses any belief of anything is not neutral. So the question would be, is flying an American flag in a classroom viewpoint neutral? Now people say, well, that's absurd. Of course, we're in the United States of America. It's our flag. It's not political. But that's just not true. It is an expression of your pride of this country. I wish it wasn't, but that's the truth. So that's why I don't like the viewpoint neutrality perspective. I think it's too messy. I think our culture is too fractured. That there are people that legitimately think that, I'm wearing this hat that has an American flag, And people ask me all the time, like, well, why do you wear it? And it's because some people legitimately think that this is a political signal. It's not. It's a signal that I love this country. That's truly what this is. And for any haters in the comment section that say, oh, according to, this section of whatever, a flag law and code, you're in violation. This is a patch that's meant to look like a flag. This is not actually a part of the U.S. flag. And I love it because it's usually, again, just to prove my point, it's usually people that are on the political left that try and drag me saying like, oh, if you love this country, how come you're violating this flag code by putting a flag and wearing it as an apparel? Again, the flag code says you can't take, like, so if I took this flag behind me hanging on my wall and then like, I don't know, I like could shrink it down with a shrink gun and make it the size of this patch and wear it, yep, that would be in violation. But this is just a patch meant to look like an American flag. It's not a literal American flag. So it's just important. But again, my point is, it's political. When you see someone wearing an American flag, chances are they have a right of center political ideology. I'm not saying that they're a Republican. I'm not saying that like they're a hardcore, libertarian or anything like that. But in general, it is. So going back to my point about viewpoint neutrality, I think it's just too much of a sticky issue to try and parse through because our culture just is no longer cohesive. And I think it's insane to say that we were ever like just one hive mentality. But culturally, I think that most people used to say that you could be proud to be an American and that didn't make you a Democrat or a Republican. But at this point, let's be honest, it does. And so I just think that in general, again, this case in the federal appeals court ruling against the Lakeville School District and saying like, hey, if you're going to allow the Black Lives Matter flags, you got to allow the Blue Lives Matter. I think that's fantastic. And again, I think it's important that, especially in a world where we're so culturally splintered, we have to allow a place for people to express their cultural values that are right of center. And I think that if we allow that in classrooms, you're actually going to find that more teachers, again, reflective of the area that they are from and where they teach, are going to be a right of center perspective. That's awesome there. Now, kind of one of the last stories that I want to talk about before I wrap up the stream is involving none other than Ilhan Omar, member of the Squad. Now, for those of us in Minnesota, she is like the worst, right? Those of us in Minnesota that are right of center Republicans, like Ilhan Omar is the worst. She is like an outright, like avowed socialist, Marxist, communist, and she absolutely hates anything that has to do with a right of center political ideology. And she expresses it all the time. Now, she has been now back to back involved in two very difficult primary races. So right now, there is a chance that her challenger, Don Samuels, actually might beat her. And it really boils down to when October 7th happened, and you had all of these progressive Marxists that literally hate the state of Israel, and many of them hate Jewish people. They're like purely anti-Semitic. And I say that like not being cute or being, trying to like make this large net and say, if you don't like Israel, that makes you anti-Semitic. No, it doesn't. I think that you can actually believe that Israel's wrong or not support Israel at all and not be anti-Semitic. If you understand that Israel is a nation that, yes, has a lot of Jewish people, but a lot of times, like Ilhan Omar, she will tie in Jewish people to the conversation about her dislike or hatred of Israel. When she says something like, it's all about the Benjamins, that is obviously a trope against Jewish people. That is what makes you anti-Semitic. If you tie in being Jewish to the state of Israel and then you criticize the state of Israel, then that is anti-Semitic because you've already tied it to a people, to a group of people. But I digress. The point is that Ilhan Omar, after October 7th, along with all of these other progressives and Marxists in the Democrat Party, have went out and said some terrible and horrendous things, to the point that a lot of the Jewish Democrats and those that support Israel that are on the left, because there are a bunch of people on the left that still support the state of Israel, and because there's also, again, Jewish people that support the state of Israel, a lot of this crossover happens. And so Ilhan Omar comes off, says these anti-Semitic things, and it's really pissed off a lot of Democrats in the 5th Congressional District. And then there's the other conversation about what she's doing in regards to black Americans, not just for Somali Americans. Because obviously Ilhan Omar, she's a naturalized citizen, she's Somali American, but there's a lot of people that are black Americans that are like, she does nothing for us other than like give us lip service talking about like her progressive, socialist, redistributive policies. So because of that, Don Samuels is challenging her now the second time in a row. Back in 2022, it was a relatively close race, and now here in 2024, it's close. And so kind of in line with that, there's been some news breaking that she failed to report assets stemming from her husband's shady wine and weed ventures and ethics complaint charges. It says these discrepancies in Omar's disclosure reports deserve to be fully investigated, National and Legal Policy Center's Paul Kremnar says. The other thing, just as a side note, this is a woman that always talks about white supremacy, tearing down the patriarchy, and here she is married to this very clearly, obviously white man. I don't know why this happens all the time. All of these leftist progressives that will go out there and scream about white supremacy and systemic racism and America being a systemically racist place, they end up with a lot of white men. Kamala Harris being in that same vein as well. But yeah, so that's funny. But according to this ethics complaint, her husband, he's out there and he's got his little wine thing going on. He's just, doing some very unethical things. The National Legal Policy Center, led by Paul Kremnar, filed the complaint with the Office of Congressional Ethics on Tuesday. The complaint dings Omar for failing to accurately report the financial assets, transactions, and liabilities of her spouse, Tim Minette, citing discrepancies in Omar's personal financial disclosures. This complaint comes roughly 3 weeks after Minnesota reformer reported and highlighted Minette's shady business ventures in the wine and marijuana industries, which have prompted lawsuits from disgruntled investors. So ultimately, listen, there's all of this shady stuff happening, which, if I'm being fair, it's not just Democrats that this happens to, but I will say that it happens a whole lot more to Democrats. I think in general, people that are involved in the game of politics, there's a incentive to do things that are not above board when it comes to finances. And that's because people approach you all the time saying, hey, I want to be able to help you out. And it does take a higher level of moral standard and character to be able to do things above board. But when it comes to kind of this track record, Democrats have been doing this for quite a while. They enrich themselves personally, and a lot of times they're not doing it in above board ways. Like right now, you have the senator out in New Jersey, Bob Mendez, and he was indicted. He's going through a trial right now. He maintains his innocence. But I mean, he was selling, allegedly, a lot of influence for like straight up gold bars. So, but yeah, this complaint alleges that it looks like $300,000 investment was made in which Ilhan claimed her husband's stake to be worth between $15,000 and $50,000, well below the $300,000 investment. 1 year later, Omar reported that her husband's stake was worth between $50,000 and $100,000. She also reported spousal income from this Est Venture LLC, one of Minette's former companies involved in the failed marijuana venture, of up to $15,000 in 2021 and up to $50,000 in 2022. And it says at the time, Omar reported that her husband's stake in the LLC was worth no more than $1,000. Now, that sounds to me as a non-legal person. Like, I've never went to law school. I've never passed or taking the bar. But it sounds to me like you're trying to, take profits that you don't have to report in regards to your taxes. And it's funny coming from a leftist progressive Marxist that believes, in dismantling capitalist systems, that they are taking advantage of the system and enriching themselves personally. Again, that's what it looks like. Everyone's due their day in court, and this is an ethics complaint. There are not been official, looks like, charges or indictments that are coming out of this. But I think it's just par for the course. And to, again, look at the larger kind of context. Ilhan is going to be in a tough fight. Just obviously that just happened in New York. Just last week, you had Jamal Bowman get thrown out of Congress, at least for the primary. He's still in Congress, but the voters rejected him outrightly. He is a member of the squad as well, and most people would have said that his district was fairly safe. Now, I know it's a lot different than the 5th Congressional District in Minnesota. That district basically was held by a long-time incumbent that was what people would, I guess, classify as a kind of moderate or centrist. And then when Bowman won that race, he comes in as a squad member, very progressive, Marxist, and then he loses. But he lost, I think, 100% again because of his anti-Semitic stances and also because he didn't support the state of Israel. And I think it's important to understand that these are two separate things. Like, you could just 100% say nothing ever anti-Semitic and say, I don't support the state of Israel. And if you are in a heavy Democratic area, you're probably going to lose, especially an area like where Bowman was that has a very large pro-Israel population because there's a lot of Jewish people that also support the state of Israel. And so I know it might sound like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. Like, well, didn't you just say that you can be against the state of Israel and not be anti-Semitic, and that Jewish people in the state of Israel are not always one and the same? Yes, that is also true. But a lot of Jewish people also support the state of Israel because clearly Israel is a state in which the majority of the population is Jewish, right? So I know that it feels like maybe I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth and that I'm saying that there's not supposed to be a distinction, but there clearly is. And this is why it's so important that you are careful with how you say things. If I impugn the state of Israel and then I say something that is typical of Jewish people, it's going to come off as anti-Semitic. And that's just the truth of the matter. But I digress. Point is that Bowman lost his primary challenge. So at this point, if he decides that he wants to run, he's going to have to be a write-in candidate. He's not going to appear on the general election ballot as the Democrat candidate. So that basically means that unless, again, he mounts a write-in campaign, which are extremely expensive, and I don't think it would be worth anyone's time, he's done. When this term is over, he will be done. So he will serve out the rest of his term. And Ilhan Omar is in a somewhat similar situation because the 5th Congressional District does have a large pro-Israel population. There are a lot of Jewish people as well that are Democrats that are in that district. On top of that, like I said, Ilhan has some love lost between some of her positions, even within Somali communities and East African communities. And then when you add this impropriety on top of it, things ain't looking so great for Ilhan. I don't think she's in her strongest position. Now, personally, I hope she loses. I hope that Don Samuels beats her. I don't think that Don Samuels will be a great congressman. I actually believe that our Republican-endorsed candidate in that race is far better. And so I want her to win, regardless of if it's Ilhan or Don Samuels. I think they're both Democrats that have terrible policy positions on the majority of things. But it is funny to see that Ilhan is truly going to be in a second fight, back-to-back election cycles. Hopefully it gets her nice and bloodied up, figuratively. So when it goes to the general election, that our gal, Dahlia, is able to actually make an impact. Well, this is going to be winding up the end of my first ever live stream. Hopefully, with coming live streams, you'll be able to get kind of a little bit more interaction when it comes to the chat from me. We're still kind of like setting things up from, again, an aesthetic viewpoint. My background, my camera, hopefully it hasn't been too laggy, but going to make some improvements there. And I hope to always stream Saturdays about this time. Truly try and start like closer to 5 o'clock. So 5 to 6, have it be an hour or less, unless something is really popping or happening. But ultimately, I hope to be able to communicate with you when I get to a point where we can actually look at chats that are coming in during the stream. That would be fantastic. That's obviously a given, because doing a live stream, you actually want to be able to interact with people that are live. I again will say, make sure to hit that like button. Drop a comment on what you liked. Comment on things that you would like to see more of. If there's specific stories that you want me to cover or talk about, you can reach out to me on my socials. You can go to my website, akkamara.com. That's akkamara.com. And I have my socials all connected there as well. That way you can reach out to me. I want to be able to truly make this about, again, giving my opinion on cultural, social, implementing, again, I'm going to have an audience that's going to be center or right of center, but encouraging people to become politically active. And listen, even if you become like a Democrat politically active, at the end of the day, I just think it's important for people to become just more involved in their communities. So even if you're a Democrat and you become more active, cool. Chances are that if you're watching this stream or watching subsequent replays of it and you like what I'm saying and you still end up being a Democrat, you're probably a far better Democrat than the ones that are currently in, that are like insane Marxist leftists. If you're a Marxist or leftist and you're watching this video and you like my content, something's probably wrong with you, or you're a family or friend. But I completely disagree with every worldview that you have if you're on that side. Like if you truly are a Marxist collectivist, so you're probably not going to watch my stream. All to say that I hope everyone finds a way to get more active and involved in their communities, finds a way to be more active and involved in the Republican Party. You can also reach out to me, again, on any of my socials. I would love to get you plugged in with, again, your local political operating unit. In Minnesota, we call it a BPOU. So please do that. I look forward to chatting with everyone next Saturday about the same time. We'll have some revamps. Thank you so much for paying attention, staying tuned in if you have stayed tuned in, liking the video, sharing it with your friends and family. I'm AK Kamara, the conservative opinionator. I'm AK Kamara, the conservative opinionator. And until next time, see you around.